Thousands of years ago, a woman, desperate to hide her newborn son, carefully prepared a basket. Sealing it with tar and placing the baby in the basket, she sent it down the river. In doing this, she gave hope to herself, to her baby, and little did she know, to a nation. Welcome to the Occult and the Apocalypse with Kristen, aka Fire Tarot Mama, where I tell you about how they took what was once widely known about God, Spirit, and you, and locked it away. Come with me while I show you what I've learned from science, religion, cultural beliefs, mythology, to turn the occult and the apocalypse into the hidden and the revealed. That leader I just spoke of, that was Sargon of Akkad, more than 1,000 years before Moses. The story goes on that he was found by the royal water drawer and that he was raised to be a cupbearer to the king. He then goes on to ascend to the throne and begin conquering the areas around. He's considered the first ruler of a multinational empire. Stories about Sargon of Akkad persisted throughout time, and copies of the stories were written about him were found in Nineveh, Ashur, and Amarna. Now, if you were with me 2 weeks ago, you'll remember that Amarna was the new capital that was built during the reign of Akhenaten in Egypt, and it was the center of Aten worship. What I failed to mention was, based on diplomatic letters and depictions of Amenhotep III, it's likely that Amenhotep III actually lived there as well, at least for a period of time, probably as co-regent to Akhenaten. It's certainly interesting to find that Sargon of Akkad's story is so similar to that of Moses, a king who would have conquered Babylon and with it the birthplace of Abraham, hundreds of years before Abraham even existed, only to have it recorded in Babylon's history later, long after Moses would have come and gone. Or at least that's what they say. See, it was found in Amarna, so it was written down at least by 1349 BC. So to center us on a timeline here, Abraham comes up out of Ur, goes into Canaan, and then into Egypt, somewhere between 1900 BC and 1800 BC, okay? Over in Iran, Zoroaster begins Zoroastrianism, a monotheistic religion, or, well, really monolithic, but monotheistic, around 1500 BC, okay? Akhenaten tries to force monolatry, or believing in one god being supreme over other gods worshipped, okay? Which was really kind of like an early monotheism in Egypt, okay? Between 1349 and 1336 BC. Per the rabbinical timeline, Moses lives somewhere between 1391 and 1271 BC. Sigmund Freud wrote a book that concluded that Moses was a follower of Akhenaten and that he was likely killed by Midians, that he fled to Midian for heresy. But the story that I plan to tell you is much more calculated, much more involved, and reflected over and over in the Pentateuch, aka the Torah, known to the Christians as the first 5 books of the Bible. But to understand where we're going, we have to understand historically where we've been. So some of the historical facts that we know. Hebrews were a sect of Canaanites who came out of the Canaanite population and appear to have migrated in and out of Egypt throughout a span of 400 to 500 years. In Egypt, they may have been known as the Hyksos. They experienced great power on and off during that time. The founder of the 18th dynasty is the one who was considered having finally beat the Hyksos. The 18th dynasty is the dynasty that later brings us Amenhotep III, and all those that would come after, okay? Now, Amenhotep III actually refers to the land of the Shashu of Yahweh, which is the first appearance of Yahweh outside of Canaan. But we'll talk about that later. In the Amenhotep stele, written around 1208 BC, approximately 86 years after the 18th dynasty ends, it's translated to refer to a people of laid waste to Israel, which is the first mention of Israel outside of the Bible. It likely actually refers to foreign nomads, but that's okay. Amenhotep was the fourth pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, so the dynasty after, and was the first one of that dynasty to be born royal at the time, okay? Since King Tut, actually. Up until somewhere between 1200 and 1001 BC, Yahweh was a god within the Canaanite religion, okay? We'll discuss this more in depth when I do my episode on Yahweh in a couple of weeks. King David conquered Jerusalem over around 1020 BC to 965 BC. And then there was Judah and Samaria, which was also known as Israel. At this time, they are monolithic, okay? So they believe Yahweh is the head god, but not the only god, okay? And they consider Yahweh the greatest god, okay? So they're really polytheistic at this point. About 400 years later, following the release of the Babylonian exile, around 538 BC, there's another revision to Judaism, and it becomes monotheistic. Although pieces of the Torah have been found from the First Temple period between 700 BC and 598 BC, it's widely accepted that the first 5 books of the Bible were written down in its final form after having been released from exile, and there were revisions to the much earlier texts, some of which were shared across multiple cultures. This was done to center Yahweh. Now, a little more about Moses and the Exodus, but only a little. Exodus 1 reminds us of the names of the sons of Israel, who was previously named Jacob. He's Jacob named Israel after he wrestled with God. Okay, it's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Joseph. Okay, not in birth order. All of the sons of Israel die, Joseph being 110, remaining in Egypt. Okay, so they all stay in Egypt. And the Israelites were, quote, exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increasing in numbers and becoming so numerous that the land was filled with them. We don't know officially exactly how much time passes. I do have a genealogy later for Moses, but we don't know exactly how much time passes. It said that they were oppressed and made to forced labor, but still their numbers grew. Most of the Exodus leading up to the actual Exodus is describing hard labor and how better the Israelites were than having to do that hard labor. And the Pharaoh, who isn't named, was so concerned about their numbers, he called 2 specific Hebrew midwives and tells them, if a boy is born, kill them, but a girl, let her live. The Hebrew midwives were scared of God and they didn't comply. One kind of has to question if these Hebrew midwives were palace midwives, but we'll get there. The Hebrew boys grew in numbers, and then the king decreed that all the Hebrew baby boys must be thrown into the river. At some point after that, baby Moses is put in a basket, floated on the Nile, and he was found by Pharaoh's daughter and raised as a prince in the palace. Now, historically, Egypt did see a steady increase of West Semitic, aka Canaanite, people. They migrated into Egypt, and occasionally over the course of the years, Canaan was even a territory of Egypt. The numbers did increase from around 2000 BC to around 1500 BC, and they were identified as Hyksos and gained much power in Egypt, okay? The Hyksos and the native Egyptians, the Theban Egyptians, intermingled for about 400 years. They married into each other's nobility. The Hyksos were considered the kings of the 15th dynasty and ran concurrently with the Egyptian 16th dynasty. Time gets a little funny around this time, but these things have occurred, okay? Now, the 16th dynasty and potentially some of the 17th dynasty are said to have a mix of Hyksos and Theban kings. It's potentially when the Hyksos intermittently gained majority of the power, okay? The 17th dynasty had a short-lived peace with the Hyksos until Sennacherib, who reigned from 1549 to 1545 BC, started a series of war with the Hyksos. His son, King Kamose, who briefly ruled, continued the wars, and Kamose's brother, Ahmose I, finally defeated the Hyksos and established the 18th dynasty, somewhere between 1551 and 1539 BC, okay? 7 generations, about 155 years later, Amenhotep III would have his own children, okay? The 18th dynasty kind of has an interesting story. More than once in this dynasty, a second-born son unexpectedly ascends the throne. Also, more than once in this dynasty, despite previous dynasties having very clear, excellent records about who the royal wives were, what their names were, what children were attributed to what wife, that was not done in this dynasty. On more than one occasion, the mother is either not known at all or only known after her son ascends the throne, okay? So it's very interesting. It's not clear, okay? Some of these pharaohs were born to lesser wives, and we'll talk about lesser wives. In the case of Amenhotep III, his children, despite having several lesser wives, all of his children were attributed to his first royal queen, Tai. Her title was Great Royal Wife, and she was considered to strengthen Amenhotep III's tie and claim to the throne. Amenhotep III was born to a minor wife of Thutmose IV. It was only after Amenhotep III ascended the throne that his own mother's name became known. Lesser wives were usually royalty from outside the Egyptian royal line directly, especially from Babylon, the surrounding tribes, and also potentially the Hyksos. She also could have been a commoner concubine from the area. I suspect she was the former, as there seemed to be some concerns about ensuring that Amenhotep III had a strong tie to the throne. He would have been about 10 when he ascended the throne, and he kept it for about 38 to 39 years before he died, so he ruled all of that time. He was about 50, he was close to 50 when he died. In his second regional year, somewhere between 12 and 13, he was married to Tai. His marriage to Tai was considered, as I said, a stronger tie to the throne because of her parents. Unlike the many times the royal family in Egypt married a daughter or a sister, Tai had 2 parents that were well known as nobility, but neither was a parent to Amenhotep III, so neither was assumed to be completely royal, okay? Her parents were Yuya and Thuya. Her father, Yuya, was considered a non-royal wealthy landowner who served in the military as either superintendent of oxen or commander of chariots. Yuya was and still is considered to be a foreigner, It's indicated by the fact that his name is spelled multiple ways while he was alive in different places, indicating it wasn't a name that the Egyptians were familiar with. And also, his mummy, which was found and DNA tested, is said to have foreign features. However, it's not really totally documented what those features may be. Okay, so we're going to talk about the DNA around this in just a minute. But Ty's mother was Thuya, and she was thought to be a royal descent. Due to her involvement to the many religious cults and her titles attested, she was thought to have been either maybe a sister or an aunt to Amenhotep III. Ty was depicted as equal politically to Amenhotep III. She was a trusted advisor to him and participated in state and religious matters. She continued this role with her son, Akhenaten, and remained active in the administrative and the religious transformation that her son spearheaded. As a reminder, Akhenaten reformed religion throughout Egypt. Although there was a slight shift in religious focus, increasing importance of Aten while Amenhotep was alive towards the end of his reign, the majority of the reform came after. There were no gods to be worshipped before Aten. There were no idols or images of Aten allowed. Only the royal family could communicate with Aten. Akhenaten wrote the hymn to Aten, in which he refers to Aten as my divine father. Aten's name could only be represented as a phonetic cartouche of his name, kind of almost like the Tetragrammaton. Does that sound familiar? Also of note, the hymn Akhenaten wrote has very similar themes and verbiage to Psalm 104. And Ty was there to guide the kings through it all. Now, Queen Ty is credited with the birth of both known sons of Amenhotep III. Crown Prince Thutmose, the oldest, who died sometime into Amenhotep III's third decade of rule. The second was Amenhotep IV, who would later become Akhenaten, who we know became pharaoh. Crown Prince Thutmose is said to have died somewhere around the third decade of rule. The only depiction that we have of him, to look at least, is a statue of him as a boy grinding grain. Although archaeologists report that Crown Prince Thutmose appeared throughout the historical record during his father's reign up until into his 32nd, 33rd, 31st, somewhere in their year, okay? He was suddenly dead, and Akhenaten was heir apparent. The mummy of a boy who was about 10 years old was found with Queen Ty, and it was initially believed that this was Crown Prince Thutmose. However, no real follow-up was ever done, and it's actually kind of absurd. It's preposterous to think that they would think that this is Crown Prince Thutmose. His brother Akhenaten was 38 when he died, and he ascended the throne somewhere between the ages of 18 to 23, probably about 21. His brother Thutmose would have died at a maximum 8 years before Akhenaten's ascension, and Akhenaten would have been at a maximum 13 when Thutmose died, okay? So Prince Thutmose was the older son, and we don't know how long was in between their births. As unsettling as it is, royal children were married very young and pressured to produce heirs sooner than anybody would like, okay? Probably particularly after ascending the throne. The concept that Amenhotep III, who was on the throne as a married pharaoh earlier than 15, surely would have had teenage and young adult children by the time he was in his late 30s and he died, okay? In my own life, I had a son at 19, and he was 20 when I was 39. So, perspective, right? Queen Ti's DNA was tested and was found to have, from her father's DNA, 2 haplogroups which do in fact link back to Levantine people, amongst other groups. Although through her mother, she had a mix of Nubian, Theban, and Levantine heritage. Through Yuya, she received haplogroup G2A and haplogroup K. And through her mother, she received haplogroup K and another one. I actually didn't catch it. In fact, they found a close familial relation between Yuya and his son-in-law, Pharaoh Amenhotep III, which was very unexpected. It appears that Yuya, even likely being foreign, was either the brother of Amenhotep III's mother, or that he was potentially a half-brother to Amenhotep III's father, although it's probably less likely. This would make Yuya Amenhotep III's uncle, probably through his mother. And Tai and Amenhotep III would be cousins. Now, Amenhotep III was a great diplomat, and he and his wife were considered very strategic. Under Amenhotep III, Egypt stretched its borders and kept tight allies beyond its borders across the Sinai Peninsula and even into Babylon. We have records of his diplomatic exchanges, which are preserved in the Amana letters, which begin with Amenhotep III, and I think they end with Neferraten, although it might be King Tut. 2 of the messages between Amenhotep III and the Babylonian Kassite emperor Bernabarash II, that's the name I'm going to put up on the screen, they become kind of pertinent potentially to the idea of Moses. Bernabarash II's reign stretched between Amenhotep III and Neferraten between 1359 BC to 1333 BC. And it's demonstrated in the Amarna letters, their relationship, okay? Bernabarash always refers to the pharaoh as brother. In one letter from Bernabarash II to Amenhotep III on EA7, it speaks regarding 2 caravan robberies of a caravan of Bernabarash's messenger. He's complaining to the pharaoh and demanding action regarding those under pharaoh's rule. He says the first one, Biyarwaza, and the second caravan, Pamahu, a governor of yours, in a vassalage, robbed. When is my brother going to adjudicate the case? In another letter, also addressing caravan robberies, he states, my brother and I made a mutual declaration of friendship. Now my merchants who were on their way with Ahutabu were detained in Canaan for business matters. After Ahutabu went on to my brother in Hinnatua of Canaan, Sam'ada, the son of Balaam of Canaan, and Sutana, the son of Stratum of Akkah, have sent their men, killed my merchants, and took away the money I send. Post haste, inquire of him that he may inform you Canaan is your country, and its kings are your servants. In your country I have been despoiled. Bring them to account. Put to death the men who put my servants to death. If you do not put these men to death, they are going to kill again, be it caravan of mine or your own messenger, and so our messages will be between us cut off. Of course, these are all the tribes that are in the Levantine, in between Babylon and Egypt at this time. So these are the Canaanite tribes, okay? It sounds like the Israelites and Bernabarash II had kind of like similar diplomatic interests. So somewhere around that same time that Bernabarash II is complaining about these tribes and the relationship between the 2 countries, Amenhotep III is having his Heb said. That's a 30-year festival. On the 30th year of a pharaoh's reign, he would have to do all these feats so that he could prove he was fit and capable to remain pharaoh. Maybe we need that now, right? At that time, he constructed a temple. It was a big temple that was boasting about all of his great successes against his enemies, okay? And one of those groups of people he boasted about was the people of the land of the Shashu of Yahweh. Now, Shashu used to be used to describe foreign nomads. At least that's how they're translating it. Meaning that these people did not have a land in and of itself, but were nomadic in nature. Sometime after this Hebsed, after this 30th year, Crown Prince Thutmose dies, and Akhenaten becomes next in line to the throne. Akhenaten is succeeded by his son-in-law, Semprekare, who's succeeded by his mother-in-law, Nefertiti/Neferraten. And then she's succeeded by either their son or grandson, they're not sure, King Tut. Now, King Tut's great uncle, the son of Thuya and Yuya, the brother of Tai, was his closest advisor. Quite suddenly after that, a man named Horemheb, that's another name I'm going to put on the screen, becomes a major advisor to Tut. He came in as a major military advisor. It's believed that he was head of the military, although there's no actual mention of him in the diligent military records leading up to the reign of King Tut. He's believed to have been born as a commoner, and they're not quite sure where. And he was without royal blood. He had a non-royal wife, and she's often depicted on statues with him. But she likely died before he ascended the throne. And he had a second royal-born wife that he married after he ascended the throne, but they had no children that we know of. He also had two children, two girls, that were buried in his tomb with him. Horemheb has an interesting story. It seems like he was able to get close to King Tut and the aging Eye. There was a tomb that was being constructed and prepared for him. Being the commander of the military and advisor, he would have gotten a nice tomb, but it was abandoned for a larger royal tomb after something very unusual in Egyptian culture occurred. I've watched some archaeology, sociology, and anthropology speakers discuss this time period in Egypt, and it was revealed that not long after Horemheb arrived on the scene, King Tut did something that had never previously been done in Egypt before. As I've said before, Egypt was already ancient at this time by at least 1,000 years, if not more. It was not uncommon for centuries-old tombs and monuments to go through periods of restoration. The Egyptians, however, did not disturb contemporary tombs. With that said, buried in the records from this young King Tut's reign is evidence that he did just that. And I propose that when this act occurs, a political plot was uncovered and then immediately atoned for. It's written in King Tut's records that at his direction, the tomb of Crown Prince Thutmose, Akhenaten's brother, the prince who's decreed dead sometime in the 3rd decade of Amenhotep III's reign, it would be opened. The tomb was confirmed to be empty by the young King Tut, and he was present to confirm it. It was documented that they resealed the tomb, and almost immediately in the historical record, Horemheb was declared a new title, hereditary prince, and next in line to the Egyptian throne. Immediately, a royal tomb began construction. Horemheb, now being crown prince, would have been immediately given major diplomatic responsibilities. And it's believed that while on a years-long diplomatic assignment to the south and west of Egypt, so further into the African continent, that King Tut died. As Horemheb was not present, the great uncle of King Tut, Tai's brother, Ai, ascends to the throne and rules for 4 years. Ai attempts to sideline Horemheb by naming 2 other men, Nachman and Ne, crown princes. And then they just expected that he was just going to accept that, right? Crown prince was higher than hereditary prince, so he assumed that this would stop Horemheb from ascending the throne. He didn't succeed, though, whether it was by old age or perhaps the actions of Horemheb when he returned. I died, and Horemheb became pharaoh of Egypt. Those other 2 men, the crown princes, they disappeared from the record. In fact, for the longest time, centuries even, all the kings associated with what was referred to as later the Aten heresy were stricken from the record. Horemheb destroyed as many references as possible to Ai, King Tut, Nefertiti, Smerkakare, and Akhenaten completely from the records, the monuments, the stelae, everything. Then he backdated the beginning of his reign to the end of Amenhotep III's, almost as if he were, in fact, his son. One might say, the rightful heir. The length of time between Amenhotep III's reign and Horemheb, 34 years. Adding on the additional 5 to 8 years, because he died somewhere, Crown Prince Thutmose died somewhere after the 30th year, but before the 38th year. That would be 39 to 42 years. It seems as though Horemheb may have been able to convince at least King Tut that he was Crown Prince Thutmose, and that his tomb was not, in fact, prepared with a mummy, that it would be empty. This is evidenced by King Tut having documented the opening and confirmation of Crown Prince Thutmose's empty tomb, and then naming Horemheb the hereditary prince. Is it possible that the adult Crown Prince, High Priest of Ptah, highest diplomat aside from the pharaoh, went on a secret mission to try to remove the Hyksos influence from the area, while also helping to quell growing concern amongst well-known and powerful allies, such as Bernabarash II, regarding the Canaanite tribes that had remained in the Levant? Would it have been in the best interest to the native Egyptians to try to prevent a group that routinely gained power over them and could possibly usurp their throne by leading them out? Was Thutmose high priest of Ptah, and which was one of the most powerful Trinity cults that was within Egypt at the time, use the Canaanite or Hebrew gods on the Hyksos to lure them out into a different land, or back into land that Canaan originally had? There's been postulation that the specific sect of Canaanite Hebrews that called themselves Israel may have been representative of a tribe that enmeshed the Canaanite god El into a trinity with the Egyptian gods Isis and Ra, making Is-Ra-El, triad. But that's never been proven, and it's often disputed. The Hyksos, although having progressively lost power in Egypt over a couple hundred years, were not known to be slaves. At least not in any consistent or intentionally oppressive way in Egypt, at least not until the 19th dynasty, so the next dynasty. In fact, prior to the 18th dynasty, they were considered wealthy shepherds. They were also great craftsmen and fantastic masons. In fact, while the Israelites were in the desert for 40 years before God gave them the manna to eat, they complained that they should have stayed in Egypt and worked because they had such good food to eat. There is evidence that a time period in the 19th dynasty, they were suppressed people and maybe even forced labor. In the Amenhotep stele around 1208 BC, about 86 years after the 18th dynasty ends, it's translated to refer to laid waste to Israel, which is the first mention of Israel outside of the Bible. And it's likely referring to foreign nomads, but that's okay. Amenhotep was the fourth pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, and he was the first pharaoh since King Tut who was born royal. So this stele would have been about 84 years after Horemheb died. Horemheb passed down the crown to another military power, who was well documented throughout Egypt during the reigns of King Tut and his previous pharaoh, okay? Somebody who was about the same age as Horemheb, and somebody who likely would have known Prince Thutmose personally. That Pharaoh Ramses, passed it to his son, who was already an adult at the time, who passed it to his own son, who was already alive before his father or grandfather had gotten onto the throne, who then passed it to his son Amenhotep, the first royal-born pharaoh since King Tut. Is it happenstance that the mountain where Moses speaks to God was Mount Horem, Horem, when the determined hereditary prince out of nowhere was named Horemheb, Horemheb? But again, if you're watching, you'll see the significance on the screen. Is it even remotely possible that the Torah, traditionally identified as written by Moses, may have had some type of translation or transliteration of a name of a well-known emperor of another great empire, Babylon, turning Burna Barash into a burning bush through oral traditions, multiple edits, multiple translation, and the desire to indicate divine guidance on something? The laws of Moses brought down from Mount Horem, which is synonymous with Sinai, but it says Horem in the beginning. Those laws exceeded beyond 10 commandments, and they're believed to be a slightly reworked version of the Code of Hammurabi, the code that governed the Babylonians, the kingdom that Burna Barash II was running at the time. Is it possible that the statement that Moses died in the desert, never having reached the promised land, but not knowing what happened to his body, a cover story for a man who incited chaos and then went home to rule his country? Just as there were 7 generations between the king who took away the power from the Hyksos and Amenhotep III's children, there were 7 generations from Abraham to Moses. So I would say that all of the above could be possible. Now, another potential explanation for Crown Prince Thutmose leaving Egypt could be having seen his father progress more towards Aten worship. Having this in common with his brother, and maybe at the behest of Queen Tai, the daughter of a foreign man, was Thutmose concerned that his bloodline was becoming diluted with foreign blood and foreign gods, and seeing the religious changes begin, Did he take it upon himself to remove a different monolithic, numerous, giant numbers group of people out of the area to help diffuse this new Aten worship? Remember, Queen Ty may or may not have been Prince Tutmosis' biological mother. She may or may not have been Akhenaten's biological mother as well. Could Crown Prince Tutmos, having tried to restore polytheism to Egypt before monotheism took over, and while he was away, Akhenaten, at the suggestion of Queen Ty, usurp his place? Why are there so many similarities between Aten worship and Yahwism? Moses is said to have killed an Egyptian slave driver and initially run in fear of Pharaoh. Did he run to Midian, marry the daughter of a polytheistic priest, have 2 children, both sons per the Bible, and leave them behind in the desert to return to get the Israelites, and find out that, after the king is dead, after his father is dead, he's no longer afraid, and find out his brother has taken his place? Could he have had sons and daughters, or did he leave those ones behind? Is his non-royal wife, is Horemheb's non-royal wife, perhaps Moses's Midian wife? Is it possible Moses's Midian wife is buried in an Egyptian tomb? Is it possible that when he found out Pharaoh was dead, he supposedly was going to go back for the Israelites and return to Egypt to take his throne, finding out his brother took his place, and kind of decided that he'd round up the shepherds and the craftsmen and the masons, who were Hyksos primarily, and numerous in number, and bring them out of Egypt, potentially to cause an economic collapse in order to come back and restore his country and himself? Well, the first 5 books of the Torah attributed to Moses, it's possible that the oral tradition of Genesis was in some form with the Israelites, but the rest of it, Moses fills in the blanks, okay? And the Genesis was found in an entirely different culture altogether anyways. So there may have been very little that the Israelites knew about their patriarchs. In Exodus, Yahweh even tells Moses that although he was revealing to Moses his name, the Israelites wouldn't know it, and he should just call him I Am. Is it possible that Moses found a God that was already starting to gain popularity and revealed his name to these followers to lead them out? Yahweh himself has an interesting story, one I plan to tell in a few weeks in its own episode, that may make you think a little bit longer about this, but if you look at Genesis, we see a theme being played out over and over. Understanding Moses is the person that we're made to believe first compiles this story, and knowing now that possibly the younger Akhenaten, at the urging of his mother, may have usurped the throne of the older Prince Tutmos, noticing this trend may make it a little easier to swallow. Abraham, eager to fulfill his covenant with God, has Ishmael with Hagar. 13 years later, Isaac is born to Sarah. Sarah is jealous of Ishmael and Hagar and demands that Hagar and Abraham's firstborn Ishmael be cast out. The younger Isaac receives the inheritance. Isaac has Esau and Jacob. They're twins, okay, with Jacob being the younger of the 2. Jacob tricks Esau into giving his inheritance for a bowl of stew. However, this isn't actually adequate enough. It has to come from the father. So Isaac's wife, Rebekah, who favored Jacob, helps Jacob to dress up like Esau in order to be blessed by the father, tricking the father into blessing the younger of the 2. Now, Jacob has 2 wives and 2 concubines, all daughters of Laban. The concubines were born to foreign wives, so they didn't get wife status, okay? Rachel was not Jacob's first wife, but it was the wife that Jacob loved the most. She gives him Joseph and Benjamin, his two youngest sons of 12. Joseph is the preferred son, but when Jacob believes he's dead, this pushes Benjamin into some sort of very protected status, favorite, okay? Jacob finds out that Joseph is alive and he rejoices. He spreads his blessing among all 12 of his sons. However, the most extravagant blessing is given to Joseph. Joseph also gets a second special blessing, one for his two sons that were born to him in Egypt. Jacob gives the primary blessing to Ephraim, Joseph's younger son, which angered Joseph, because the blessing should have gone to Manasseh, the older of the two. He even calls him out for it. Are you noticing a trend here? The younger son blessed over the older son, whether by trick or cruel, jealous wife, or by the choice of a father disregarding tradition. Now, Moses is said to have been the great-grandson of Levi, who was the only tribe that was not granted land in Jacob's blessing. In fact, the Levites were promised the ability to be the priestly class of the Israelites. So they were the ones connected to God, okay? Now, Levi's second son, Kohath, has a firstborn named Amram. Now, Amram married his father's sister and had Aaron first, then Moses, then Miriam. So if Moses is Prince Tutmosis, Amram would be Amenhotep III. It's problematic for a couple of reasons. For one, Aaron is the firstborn. He's a boy. He would have been born in Egypt, and he would have been ordered to be killed if the way it played out was the way it played out. And secondly, Moses was a prince of Egypt, raised in the royal house, with no record of his biological mother and who that would be. And based on how it's told in Exodus, supposedly he's given to his mother to be nursed. But unless she happens to live in the palace, maybe as a lesser wife, how would they know who his mother was? Okay? There's no way for him to track what parent he belongs to. So if this was some sort of political plot, you could walk up and say, I was sent down the river to be saved, and your mother is my mother. There's no exchange or explanation as to how Aaron and Moses find out that they're brothers, okay? So there's no way to confirm that Moses is from Amram. But if it is an allegory to his own family, it does make sense because of the close tie between Thuya and Amenhotep III biologically, okay? So remember, just everything is an allegory, even when it's fact. Inside of the Exodus, okay, Moses is initially referred to as an Egyptian. And when conspiring with Yahweh, Yahweh refers to the Israelites as a group outside of Moses himself, telling Moses to tell him he is the God of their fathers, and talking about their patriarchs, their covenant. Moses is never really included in on it. In fact, it's possible that Yahweh was not the original God of the Israelites at all. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was simply known as I Am, or to state otherwise, existence. Jesus seems to restore the I Am when he comes over 1,300 years later. He is, as we're told, of the order of Melchizedek. That's someone I'll discuss when I talk about my Yahweh episode. Now, Jesus, when he transfigured on the mountain, it said that he was there with Moses and Elijah. Moses, the one who essentially started the religion, who could have lied for political reasons, and Elijah, who was known for hardline pushing Yahwism over their previous religion beliefs, and is attributed to the majority of the changes both in the text and also from polytheistic to monolithic straight into monotheism. When Jesus transfigured and was shining and glowing white, essentially symbolizing being anew or pure, Moses and Elijah disappeared. They were gone. Symbolically, one could say they were stripped away. So Jesus transfigured, became anew, became pure, and no longer carried the thoughts of Moses and Elijah. But that's my own interpretation. You're allowed to have your own. Could it be a metaphor for having stripped the bias and diplomatic edits to reveal the truth about the divine? Possibly. Now, does this negate the wondrous miracles that are reported to have occurred? I don't believe so. I believe both things can be true. I believe the initial reason for the Exodus may not have been about the Father at all, but that faith may have created the miracles we see in Exodus and after. And I'll leave that for you to think about. Next week, we will be discussing miracles, Old Testament miracles, New Testament miracles, other culture miracles, miracles stemming across time and space, including modern miracles. One thing I will tell you, as you know, we wrap up, it's been a long episode, the longest I've ever done. In one specific section of the Red Sea, there is a small cache of what can only be identified as chariot wheels. Interestingly enough, these wheels are only found in this design in the late 18th dynasty, and there are many of them. Because they're made of wood, they can't be retrieved and studied, and we don't know why they're there. No one can seem to explain. The only explanation I can come up with is that, as Jesus said, with the smallest amount of faith, man will accomplish greater miracles than he. Perhaps Moses had enough faith to part the Red Sea and have it come back together to engulf his brother's chariots that were chasing them. Thank you for helping me to tell you the story of Moses. It's one that I have been excited to tell you and have been researching for several years. And in the process of finding Moses, I found out a lot about myself. So I appreciate you letting me share it with you. And thank you for helping me bring the occult and the apocalypse to just the hidden and the revealed. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.